The day the court ruled in Kendra's favor, I wasn't even in the room. I couldn't be. I stood just outside in the hallway, my body rigid, my hands clenched so tightly the knuckles turned white. Through the thick glass pane of the courtroom door, I watched. Not just the verdict, no, that was almost expected, but the scene inside that felt like a cruel play staged just for me. Kendra was beaming. My mother, our mother, was sitting beside her, holding her hand tightly, like she was the one who had just been wronged. She dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, her face twisted in some grotesque mask of grief and victory, tears falling for the camera or the judge or maybe just for effect. As if she were the victim. As if this wasn't orchestrated. As if the destruction they caused wasn't deliberate. What made it all worse, what cut the deepest, was knowing exactly where the money came from. The war chest they used to win that trial. $50 million.
Gone. Just like that.
Siphoned out of my company. My vision. My labor. The startup I built from nothing, brick by painstaking brick, long nights and lonely mornings. Every deal I closed, every investor I charmed, every strategy one rewrote at midnight because I couldn't afford to lose, they turned it into a weapon. Used it to bribe a judge. Yes, bribe, because there is no other word for what they did. All to protect the golden daughter. The one they always loved more. The one who could do no wrong. Even when she did everything wrong. But this betrayal, it wasn't sudden. It didn't begin in that courtroom. No, it had been growing quietly like mold under the surface since I was a child. I remember vividly. I was 5 when my stepmother moved in. She swept into our lives with her manicured nails and her designer luggage, smelling like gardenias and expensive shampoo. She brought chaos disguised as charm. Frilly curtains that didn't match the walls, a little white dog that barked at everything but her, and a daughter who never had to ask twice.
Kendra.
With her perfect ringlets and her perfectly practiced smile. She was the kind of girl adults instantly adored. Charming, composed, all manners and soft giggles. And I faded.
Quickly.
They didn't even try to hide it. At first, it was subtle. A shift in bedtime stories. Praise that came less often. My drawings stayed on the fridge for days. Hers were framed. Then it grew bolder. Gifts she didn't earn. Vacations I didn't get invited to. I remember my 7th birthday, my mother baked a cake from a box and forgot the candles. 2 weeks later, Kendra's party had ponies and a live band. I was there, standing by the fence, watching her twirl in a new dress under fairy lights, my stomach hollow. That pattern never broke, it only evolved. Through high school, through college, through every major event in my life, I was the outsider looking in. I watched them give her chances they never gave me. Watched them clean up her messes, shield her from the consequences of her own selfishness.
And now?
Now, they used my money to rewrite reality. They bought a judge, rewrote the truth, painted me as greedy, unstable, ungrateful, as if all I ever wanted was a slice of something I didn't deserve. But I deserved it. I earned it. Every inch of that company. Every dollar. And they took it from me like it was theirs to take. Like I was just a placeholder until their real daughter could step in and claim the throne. So no, I wasn't in the room when the ruling came. I couldn't bear to breathe the same air as them. I watched from the hallway, behind the glass, feeling like a ghost. Like a shadow of a child still waiting to be chosen. And as they embraced, as they cried those bitter, performative tears, I stood there silently, my heart pounding like war drums in my ears, knowing I would never forget this moment. Not because it broke me, but because it finally woke me up. They left me behind a long time ago. And now, I'm done following. A force. What began as nothing more than an idea in my cramped, overheated studio apartment grew into something I could have never imagined. Back then, the walls were peeling, my desk was a salvaged door balanced on milk crates, and I could hear the neighbors arguing through the thin plaster like they were in the room with me. There was no air conditioning, just a rattling box fan in the window and a whole lot of ambition in my chest. But that idea, that one stubborn, beating thing in my brain, refused to die. It whispered to me at 3 a.m. while I stared at lines of code, reworking every broken form submission, every bad UI. It pushed me through microwave dinners, sleepless nights, and that constant, nauseating mix of fear and hope that comes from building something with no guarantee that anyone would ever care. But they did. They cared. Slowly, the user count began to tick upward. At first it was a dozen, then a few hundred. And then, before I had time to process it, we hit thousands. Tenants trying to fight off eviction notices they couldn't understand. Single moms who'd been steamrolled by landlords too powerful to touch. Veterans, wounded in ways you can't always see, who didn't even know they had rights left to fight for. People who'd been ignored, silenced, overlooked, finally had something on their side. And it wasn't just a website anymore. It was a movement. We started partnering with public libraries. I remember walking into the first one, a small branch in a dusty corner of town where the carpet smelled faintly of mildew and old pages, and pitching our mission to the librarian like it was the gospel. Her eyes welled up as I showed her how it worked. "You mean I can help people here?" she asked. And when she said yes, when she let us install that first terminal, I cried in the car for 10 minutes before I could even drive away. Clinics followed. Then local governments. Small towns with big problems welcomed us in, desperate for help they couldn't afford. The Open Law Access Foundation took notice and offered us a six-figure grant. I still remember getting that email. I was in my kitchen, barefoot, pouring cereal at noon because I'd forgotten to eat all morning. I dropped the spoon, just stood there, staring at my phone, heart thudding in my chest like it might leap out. 6 figures. For expansion. For impact. For belief in me.
We used it wisely.
Savannah was hiring staff, carefully, passionately. Not just resumes, but people who understood why we did what we did. People who'd been there, too. We built better tools, faster ones that could triage a legal need in seconds. We designed interfaces so intuitive, so gentle, that even a grandmother who'd never touched a laptop before could navigate them. We translated documents into plain English. We made justice readable. We made it possible. And people began to tell us we were changing lives. I'd get voicemails I couldn't listen to all the way through. Emails I'd reread for days. A tenant who won their case and cried on the courthouse steps. A mother who kept custody because she understood her rights for the first time. Those moments, they filled me, healed me, anchored me in something real. And at home, I still tried to be just Savannah. To cook, to breathe, to remember to rest. But even in my quiet moments, the movement hummed behind my eyes. It never really stopped. Because this wasn't just work. This wasn't just a startup. This was my defiance. My resistance. My love letter to everyone who had ever been dismissed or spoken over or told they didn't count. And maybe, deep down, it was a love letter to myself too. To that little girl who had always been second best, who had learned early not to expect the world to show up for her. So she built something that could show up for everyone else. The cameras. The cameras were everywhere, mounted discreetly in corners, embedded in light fixtures, framed inside the edges of conference screens. Not for show. Not for vanity. But because Savannah had built something sacred. A fortress. A digital, living, breathing fortress of fairness. Every lens was a sentry. Every angle a safeguard. Years of her life had gone into this. Years of squinting at grainy footage, debugging data feeds, and building a system that wouldn't flinch when power came knocking. It was her answer to a world that twisted justice in the shadows. A world that had betrayed her too many times to count. She had built the system because she'd lived the consequences of silence. Because she knew what it was to scream and not be heard. Every byte of data, every logged timestamp, it was armor. It was her rebellion wrapped in code and clarity. No special treatment.
No hidden doors.
No favors granted behind closed doors. Not in her house. Not under her name. Savannah would not let bloodlines breach it. Not now. Not ever. And yet they had. Somehow they still had. She stood in the server room, cold, humming, sterile, alone. The monitors flickered quietly. Everything looked normal. But it wasn't. Nothing was. Her arms wrapped around herself like a reflex, like maybe she could hold her pieces together long enough to make sense of what had just happened. The echo of betrayal still hung in the air like the aftershock of an earthquake, invisible but undeniable. Her breath fogged slightly as she exhaled. And in the hollow silence, she whispered, not to anyone, but to the walls, to the blinking machines, to the bones of what she had built. "That's it," Savannah murmured, her voice hoarse, cracked open. "No one steps on my justice again. Not even family."
She meant it.
Her eyes burned, not with tears, but with something sharper, something colder. This wasn't pain. This was resolve calcifying in her chest. And still, in the back of her mind, a single image clung like frost on glass, that hospital room. She never imagined it would start there. She could still feel the needle tugging gently against her skin, the antiseptic smell so strong it coated her tongue. The bed was stiff, the lighting pale and too bright. Machines beeped softly, a metronome of vulnerability. She was too tired to read, too worn down to question. Her body had betrayed her, and in that state, tethered to tubes, weak, half-drugged, drifting in and out, they had asked her to sign. Just a page. Just routine, they'd said. Just paperwork to streamline operations. A formality. She remembered the pen trembling in her hand, the warm voice beside her, familiar, coaxing, telling her not to worry, that everything was fine, that they were family.
She signed.
Because she was exhausted, because she still wanted to believe in love, because she didn't think her own blood would use a hospital wristband as a strategy. But they did. And now here she was, standing in the ashes of what she thought was untouchable, realizing that even her fortress had a gate she hadn't seen.
It wasn't code they hacked.
It wasn't her systems they bypassed. It was her trust. That page, her own hand signing her own undoing, haunted her more than any breach could have. And yet, something else stirred inside her now. Not just grief. Not just rage. Something deeper. Conviction. Because they took her off guard once. They caught her human. But she would not be human like that again. She stared into the camera feed, at the blinking red lights that never looked away. Watch, she whispered to them.
Witness.
Document. Burn it into history. Savannah was no longer just the woman who built the fortress. She was the fire behind it now. What they didn't understand, what they never truly grasped, was that Savannah still had one thing left. The truth. Not the glossy kind served in courtrooms or the polished statements paraded before press.
No.
The raw kind. The kind that lived in quiet places. In email drafts never sent. In the eyes of the people her work had saved. In the late-night recordings where she spoke into the dark just to feel heard. The kind of truth that didn't require a spotlight, it only needed time. And Savannah was done playing defense. She was done curling up to absorb the next blow, done retreating into silence while others spun stories and built illusions on her back. No more flinching. No more carefully measured words meant to keep the peace. The war had already been declared. And Savannah? She wasn't interested in surviving it anymore. She was going to end it. And then the letter came. It arrived quietly, tucked into a stack of routine deliveries, on a morning soaked in drizzle. The kind of morning that presses against windows like a memory. The sky was a sheet of wet gray, and the scent of wet earth drifted through the hallway vents. Savannah's fingers brushed the envelope absently at first, just another piece of mail. But something made her pause. It was thin, weightless, almost. The paper had buckled slightly from the moisture, soft and trembling like it had been carried through a storm. The ink had smudged in one corner, but it was the handwriting that struck her still. Delicate, slanted, foreign almost in the way it curved the letters like whispers. Not printed, not stamped, written by hand. She tore it open without fully knowing why. Some part of her, buried beneath the steel and strategy, still hoped. Inside, the message was short. No header. No return address. Just 5 lines. Savannah never left you because Savannah wanted to. Now all Savannah wants is to see you once more. It stopped me cold. The breath caught in my throat and refused to move. My body forgot how to function. Fingers clenched around the page. Shoulders frozen mid-rise. I read the words once.
Twice.
10 times. My eyes searching for something hidden, some code, some trick. But it was just those words.
Bare.
Naked. Too intimate to ignore. Too vague to dismiss. The room around me blurred. I could still hear the rain outside, tapping gently against the window pane like someone waiting to be let in. My chest ached in a way I hadn't allowed in years. Not since I built my first line of defense. Not since I stopped hoping anyone would come back. Because she had left. And it had never made sense. No warning. No explanation. Just absence. A hollow where someone used to be. And now this impossible letter, showed up like a ghost in the fog.
Soft.
And yet louder than anything I'd heard in months. I looked down at the trembling paper, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't know what to do. Because truth is a sword, yes, but sometimes it's a wound too. And sometimes it shows up dressed as an apology. And the question that lodged in my throat wasn't whether I believed her. It was whether I wanted to. Not being born into the right version of family, that's where it started. That quiet, Invisible disqualification no one says out loud, but you feel it in every gesture, every closed door, every birthday where the smile never reached their eyes. You grow up thinking maybe if you're smart enough, quiet enough, useful enough, they'll change their minds. Maybe you'll become right eventually. But the truth is, some families write the rules before you even arrive. And you spend your entire life trying to read a script you were never given. This was never about inheritance. God, if they only knew how little I cared about the money, the name, the title. It was never about jealousy, either. Jealousy assumes I wanted to trade places with Kendra. I didn't. I pitied her, even as I envied her safety. No, this was always about something deeper. About something they never taught at those Sunday brunches or summer homes or charity galas. It was about accountability. That quiet, unwavering belief that power must answer to the truth. That people, regardless of last names, trust funds, or handshakes behind velvet doors, should face the weight of their actions. That justice can't be inherited like a beachfront property. It can't be borrowed with a favor. It can't be forged with a signature slipped under someone's hand while they're sedated in a hospital bed. Justice must be earned, must be fought for, especially when it's not convenient, especially when it costs you everything, even when the battle is lonely. And mine was. I fought it alone, through years of cold boardrooms and warm lies, through nights where the silence felt heavier than any enemy. When my own reflection looked back at me and asked, "Are you sure this is worth it?"
And I answered yes every single time.
Even when the yes tasted like blood. Now I stood under lights that felt too bright, too sterile. The room was packed. Journalists, former staff, donors, partners, strangers. All of them watching me like I was still the woman they remembered, polished, composed, visionary. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I wasn't interested in the optics. I wasn't interested in saving face. I had done enough of that already. I turned from the screen, the one they had all been watching, the highlight reel of my rise and fall, curated by people who never asked for my side, and I faced the crowd. My pulse beat steady behind my ribs, but my hands didn't shake. Not anymore. My voice, when it came, was low, measured. But every word carried weight. I am no longer the CEO of my legal startup, I said, and I saw it. That flicker. The ripple across the sea of faces.
Surprise.
Confusion. Relief, maybe from some. Satisfaction from others. I didn't care. But make no mistake, I continued. Stepping down does not mean stepping away. I took a breath, not to steady myself, but to feel the air, to own the space. This mission was never about my title. It was never about control. It was about building a world where justice doesn't depend on your bloodline, where your voice counts even if your last name doesn't open doors. That mission didn't end because I walked out of a boardroom. It began the moment they tried to silence me. I saw it now, some leaning forward, some frozen, a few with eyes that had begun to sting. And I meant every word, because I had lost something.
Yes.
But I had found something, too. A clarity, a fury sharpened into focus. They thought stripping me of my title would end the story. But they forgot. I was never the product. I was the fire that built it. And now I was free to burn.